Someone with logical arguments, but instead of winning the discussion, realized that the other person became even more resistant. This is a common problem. We argue thinking that reason will prevail, but reality is different. The more we try to prove a point, the more the other clings to their own. In the end, no one wins, only gets worn out. Most discussions are not about seeking truth, but about feeding the ego. People enter debates driven by a desire for validation, not by a genuine interest in learning. And this creates a toxic cycle. You argue, the other rebuts, the conversation heats up, and the initial objective is lost. In the heat of the moment, we forget what really matters. Not the logic of the argument, but how emotions shape the perception of reality. Inspired by the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche on the pursuit of power, this video explores how silence can be applied in everyday life to transform the way we interact and influence others. Friedrich Nietzsche saw power not as the ability to impose ideas by force, but as the ability to control oneself and thereby influence others. Instead of reacting impulsively, the true strategist chooses when to speak and when to remain silent. This is what we will explore. How silence is often stronger than any word. Arguing seems like the natural way to prove a point, but the truth is that most heated conversations do not lead to real change. The reason? The human brain is not programmed to accept arguments that challenge its beliefs. On the contrary, when someone feels that their ideas are being attacked, the instinct is to defend, not reflect. This happens because of what psychologists call confirmation bias. Instead of rationally analyzing information, we tend to seek evidence that reinforces what we already believe. In other words, the more you try to defeat someone in an argument, the more that person clings to their own opinion. The result, instead of convincing, you create resistance. Another common mistake is to confuse debate with social validation. Many people enter discussions not because they want to learn something new, but because they want to prove they are right. When the goal is not knowledge, but the desire to come out victorious, any conversation becomes a battle of egos. If you find yourself arguing just to reaffirm your position, you are falling right into that trap. In addition, emotional reactivity weakens any position. The moment you lose control and start responding in the heat of the moment, you've already lost. Because the one who reacts is being manipulated by the environment, while the one who maintains silence controls the dynamics of the conversation. Most fights are not won with arguments, but with presence and posture. Nietzsche argued that real power lies not in countering every provocation, but in mastering one's own reactions. This idea leads us to the next point, how the philosophy of strategic silence can transform your influence in any situation. Friedrich Nietzsche understood power differently from most people. For him, true mastery was not in brute force or in the imposition of ideas, but in the ability to influence reality without being a slave to one's own emotions. His concept of the will to power did not refer only to dominating others, but primarily to mastering oneself. At the heart of this thought is the figure of the Übermensch, the Superman, the one who transcends instinctive reactions and acts strategically. He does not get irritated by provocations, does not wear himself out trying to prove a point, and does not react automatically to external stimuli. He observes, reflects, and chooses when and how to manifest himself. This idea connects directly with the power of strategic silence. For Nietzsche, silence was not synonymous with passivity, but a powerful tool of control. Whoever masters silence commands respect without needing to wear themselves out. Instead of falling into the trap of emotional debates, he creates tension and forces the other to reveal themselves. Silence has a profound psychological effect. When someone expects a response and receives only a pause, uncertainty begins to erode their confidence. The human mind hates emptiness, and in the face of silence, it fills that space with doubts and interpretations. This is the secret of strategic silence. Instead of reacting to every provocation, you allow the other to get lost in their own insecurity. Nietzsche believed that most people are prisoners of their own emotions, and that true strength lies in controlling these automatic responses. In his words, he who cannot command himself will always end up being commanded by someone. And in the real world, we see this principle applied by leaders, strategists, and influencers who know that speaking less is often the path to gaining more. The idea that silence can be a tool of power is not just theoretical. It has been applied by some of the brightest minds in history: philosophers, business strategists, and legendary warriors. Many influential figures have known how to use silence to control interactions and win battles without raising their voice. Socrates never needed to prove he was right. He simply asked questions. His method, known as Socratic maeutics, consisted of a dialectical game of questions and answers, followed by more questions. He questioned, listened, and allowed the opponent to contradict themselves. This process, besides avoiding direct confrontations, made the person feel responsible for the change in opinion, which made the learning much more effective. This strategy is still used by great negotiators and leaders. Instead of trying to convince someone immediately, they ask strategic questions that lead the other to see flaws in their own logic. This not only disarms conflicts, but makes people reach the right conclusions on their own, which is much more powerful than simply telling them what to think. Steve Jobs was not a man of many words. He knew that in negotiations and presentations, silence was his greatest weapon. When he wanted his team or partners to make a decision, he paused and waited. The discomfort of silence forced others to fill the space, often yielding to the idea Jobs wanted to impose. Jobs's strategic silence created tension and expectation. When he finally spoke, his words carried weight. He dominated the rhythm of conversations and used calculated pauses to force his listeners to reflect. This ability not only helped him build Apple, but also made him one of the most influential figures in the corporate world. The legendary samurai Miyamoto Musashi understood that a fight began long before the first sword was drawn. He used silence to destabilize his opponents. When challenged to a duel, he would often arrive late on purpose, forcing his opponent to wait and be consumed by anxiety. This psychological game undermined the opponent's confidence even before the fight began. Musashi also adopted a minimalist combat style. He did not waste energy on unnecessary strikes. Instead, he studied the enemy's movements, waited for an opening, and attacked at the exact moment. His absolute self-control made him one of the greatest warriors in history. The principle behind these stories is clear. Those who control silence control the situation. In debates, negotiations, or even battles, the one who remains calm and uses strategic pauses gains the advantage. This brings us to an important question. Why do so many people fail to use this technique? The answer lies in the psychology of reactivity. If silence is such a powerful weapon, why do most people feel the need to fill every space with words? The answer lies in human psychology. Our mind is programmed to react impulsively to external stimuli, especially when we feel challenged. This happens because for the brain, arguing is not just an exchange of ideas, it is a fight for identity, control, and validation. One of the biggest obstacles to productive conversations is confirmation bias, also known as selective evidence gathering. This phenomenon causes people to seek only information that reinforces their prior beliefs, ignoring any contrary arguments. When someone challenges us in a debate, we don't interpret it as a learning opportunity, but rather as a threat. Our instinct is then to rebut, defend, and reaffirm our certainties, no matter how logical the evidence presented may be. This explains why most discussions don't change opinions, they only reinforce positions. Instead of dialoguing, we enter a cycle of resistance, making any argument useless. Another reason we react impulsively is that we interpret criticism as an attack on our identity. If someone questions our political, religious, or moral beliefs, we don't just see it as a disagreement of ideas, but as a personal offense. This triggers the amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for emotional responses, unleashing defensive and aggressive reactions. This phenomenon explains why many discussions spiral out of control. Instead of staying calm, we are overtaken by the need to protect who we believe we are. Silence, in this context, is an act of strength. It shows that you don't need to defend yourself from everything. You have control over yourself. Many people believe that by speaking louder or imposing their opinions, they are gaining influence. But true control does not lie in dominating others. It lies in dominating your own reactions. Those who feel the need to respond to everything are actually being guided by the environment. Think of the great leaders and strategists in history. They were rarely the ones who spoke too much, but rather those who knew how to listen, observe, and act at the right moment. Strategic silence is not a sign of weakness, but an indication of psychological maturity. If we want to gain more power in our interactions, we must first learn to control our reactivity. And for that, the next step is to understand how to apply strategic silence in everyday life. Knowing that silence is a powerful tool is one thing, but how to put it into practice? The secret lies in 3 fundamental techniques. Using silence as a response, controlling your non-verbal communication, and employing strategic pauses to gain an advantage in conversations and negotiations. In many situations, the best way to assert yourself is not by countering an argument, but by letting the other person deal with their own discomfort. Silence can be especially effective when someone tries to provoke or manipulate you emotionally. Imagine someone makes a critical comment, expecting you to defend yourself. If you react, you're playing on the other person's field, validating the provocation. But if you simply look at them, give a slight smile and don't respond, you create psychological tension. The other person begins to doubt their own argument. The absence of a response forces them to fill the void, and often they back down or lose control. Silence is even more powerful when combined with proper body language. What distinguishes someone who is silent because they are cornered from someone who is silent because they are in control? Posture, gaze, and presence. Maintaining firm eye contact without blinking excessively, keeping a relaxed posture, and not showing haste to respond are signs of mastery. In many situations, your behavior says more than your words. People who speak quickly and without pauses convey anxiety. Those who use silence between sentences convey power. Great communicators, such as politicians and negotiators, use pauses to create expectation and increase the impact of their words. Furthermore, silence before a response forces the other person to pay more attention to what will be said. This is especially useful in situations where you need to reinforce your authority. Applying strategic silence does not mean staying quiet all the time, but rather knowing when to speak and when to let the other person get lost in their own speech. Mastering this skill is what separates impulsive people from true social strategists. Now that we understand how to use silence in practice, let's wrap it all up with a final reflection on the true power behind this strategy. If there's one central lesson in everything we've seen so far, it's that true power doesn't come from speaking more, but from controlling when and how to speak. The one who masters the impulse to respond impulsively naturally becomes more respected, more influential, and harder to manipulate. Nietzsche taught us that the will to power begins within ourselves, and figures like Socrates, Steve Jobs, and Miyamoto Musashi showed how silence can be a powerful weapon in any social interaction. There is an invisible game of influence happening. Those who understand it stop falling into the trap of useless debates and learn to use silence to become a stronger presence. Now I challenge you. In your next conversation, do it differently. Use strategic silence. Wait, observe. Don't rush to respond. Watch what happens. And if you've used this strategy before or want to share your experiences, leave your comment below.